This kind of stuff.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. I'll just wait for a minute. I see a lot of attendees rolling in, so welcome, everybody. I'll just give 1 minute for our attendees to settle out, and then I'll get started. Okay, so thanks everybody for joining today's CARSP webinar. My name is Tony Churchill, and I'm a senior engineer with Tetra Tech Canada. It's a pleasure to be here to moderate this session. I haven't moderated one of these for many years since I was with the City of Calgary, but it's great to be here today. For those of you who aren't CARSP members and have paid to join this webinar, I hope you'd consider joining CARSP. These webinars are free to CARSP members. And we have another great webinar coming up on April 23rd, which is going to be Jairo Villafara. And he's going to be speaking about the geographic distribution of motor vehicle collisions involving pedestrians, resulting in fatal, major, and minor injuries in Winnipeg. So that should be a really interesting presentation, and we hope you join us for that. So CARSP, as an organization, supports Canada's road safety community by providing access to multidisciplinary information, research, and networking opportunities. And so our three core functions are providing news, such as the Canadian Road Safety News Digest, which I hope you've all had a chance to have a look at. There's some great content in there. The second is knowledge sharing opportunities, including our annual conference, which this year is going to be in Quebec, and these webinars. So please check our website, carsp.ca, for more information about that. And then also member networking. So the conference is a great opportunity for that. But also we have a member database in the members only section on carsp.ca. So please check that out. And then I wanted to remind everybody before we start that we are going to be monitoring the Q&A. So if you have questions as Shade is presenting, please jot those down. We'll be keeping an eye on those, and then we'll have an opportunity to ask some questions at the end. And I also wanted to mention before we start that at the end there will be a survey just so we can get some feedback to continue to improve these webinars. And we're going to be having a draw for a $25 Tim Hortons gift card. So if you can take some time and give us some feedback, you'll be entered for that card. So with that preamble out of the way, it's my pleasure to introduce Shada Senajad. She's going to be speaking today about City of Toronto speed management strategy. So reducing speed is obviously one of the main priorities for road safety. And I'm looking forward to hearing more from her about what's happening in Toronto and why this is important. And Shada is a professional engineer and road safety professional with over 17 years of experience in the field of road safety and active transportation. She's the manager of Vision Zero projects at the City of Toronto and has led several projects involving policymaking, planning, designing, operating, and monitoring the right-of-way, particularly for vulnerable road users. She also shares her expertise as an educator in the field. Shada holds a bachelor's degree in civil engineering and a master's degree in transportation planning and engineering, with experience in both public and private sectors. As well, Shada serves on the board of directors of the Ontario Traffic Council, helping to shape transportation policies and best practices across the province. So it's my great pleasure to welcome Shada.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks.
And thank you, CARSP, for reaching out to me and sort of planning this webinar. I'm really happy to be here. Thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your lunchtime for being here to listen to this topic. Hopefully, there is something new in it for everybody. I'm going to share my screen. Maybe.
Yeah, that's great. I can see it. Yeah, thanks.
Perfect. Okay, I'm gonna launch into it then. So I'm here today to talk about City of Toronto's speed management strategy. I'm going to spend a few minutes talking about the City of Toronto's Vision Zero road safety plan as a whole, and then get into the specific sort of countermeasures and programs that we have under the speed management strategy umbrella. Um, and I will talk both about the what of those components, but also the how. You will see that none of them are things that you probably haven't heard about before. What I find when I look at other cities and how they do things is I am most curious about how are they rolling out different countermeasures, how is location selection done, how widely spread are the sort of the different measures that are out there. So I will talk about that a little bit as well, and hopefully then fill in any blanks through responses to questions. So we started the Vision Zero Road Safety Plan in Toronto in 2016, and the budget for it has grown and is now at almost $100 million a year, based on our latest budget in 2025. We have 7 emphasis areas: pedestrians, school children, older adults, cyclists, motorcyclists. So those are the mode users that are overrepresented in the number of fatalities and serious injuries compared to sort of the amount of representation of them in terms of number of trips out on the road. And then there are 2 categories of aggressive driving and distraction and heavy trucks. Those are the 2 areas that contribute more heavily towards fatalities and serious injuries. So those are the areas we focus on. Vision Zero 2.0 was our sort of renewed focus on Vision Zero. We launched it in 2019, and as a part of that, identified these 6 focus actions or 6 pillars that continue to be our blueprint for our Vision Zero road safety plan. And they include road design improvements, so building self-enforcing roads that encourage all road users to behave safely, addressing high-risk mid-block crossings, which is a common issue in a lot of Canadian contexts with post-war suburbs, addressing left turn and right turn collisions at signalized intersections, enhancing police enforcement, education and engaging with the public, and the speed management strategy. So speed management is one of those 6, and what I will be focusing more on in today's webinar. Um, Starting around 2010, that which you don't see in this graph, our number of fatalities started climbing up to the point where in 2016 we had our worst year where we almost had 80 fatalities in one year, and that's the year where the Vision Zero Road Safety Plan was launched. Since then, our fatalities have been in the decline. Our 5-year average right now is 53, but the number has been declining uh, every year. Certainly not as fast as we would like it to see. Our ultimate goal is 0 fatalities and serious injuries. So we are constantly tweaking the program and looking for ways of getting to that 0 faster, which is why I find this visual pretty compelling. It shows you where in 2016 what our road safety program looked like and the types of sort of sub-programs and initiatives that made up the city's road safety plan, and how every year since then our budget has been growing. We started with $20 million budget, and now we're at, as I mentioned, about 100 million. And with that, the sort of the breadth of the types of initiatives that we have has increased, but also the magnitude of those. So a lot of these programs have seen updates, expansions, accelerations, in addition to new programs that we have introduced. And so I will talk about the speed related ones today. Apologies for my voice. I'm recovering from a cold. If I get a cough attack, I might have to uh, put myself on mute for a second and deal with that. And and so the visual you see in front of you is the many different programs and initiatives that we have under the Vision Zero Road Safety Plan umbrella. A lot of them I will talk about today because they, whether directly or indirectly, address speeding. But this gives you an overall view of how large or widespread the different countermeasures are. I'm sure everybody is familiar with, say, the safe system approach. The visual you see in front of you is from TAC's Vision Zero primer on safe system. Like many other North American cities, we have adopted safe system as the how of how we're going to get to Vision Zero. And the idea of it, for anyone who may not be familiar, is that there are multiple layers within the safe system that help us prevent fatalities and serious injuries from happening. And those layers are, ensuring safe road users, safe vehicles, safe road design, a lot of the work that we do in transportation services, post-crash care, safe land use planning, which is fundamental, and safe speeds. So again, the focus of today's webinar is on that component, but it is a major component of safe system approach, as you will see in the next couple of slides. Um, but parallel to that, in case you haven't seen the Swiss cheese model, I find it very a compelling way of explaining the safe system approach in that um, there are these multiple layers of redundancy that we want to build into the system so that at any time, if one or more layers fail, other layers come to help to make sure a collision doesn't become deadly or result in a serious injury. So this is a very helpful way I find in our line of work where when we think about road safety. What are the different layers that there could be, and how do we make sure the overlapping of these layers makes sure that there's no fatality and serious injury instead of trying to look for the one contributor to every fatality or serious injury. A few slides on the problem with speed in the first place, and they all point to the laws of physics and the biology of the human body. Um, First point being that as humans, when we are driving, our field of vision is very different depending on how fast our vehicle is moving. The visual in front of you is trying to show our peripheral view, what we can see on the sides and process on the sides of our sort of central focus when we're driving at 25 kilometers per hour, and compares that to what that looks like at 50 kilometers per hour. And it is a drastic reduction in what we are able to see and identify and make decisions on. If I could quickly go on a tangent, I'm sure a lot of us have heard about challenges with larger vehicles, SUVs and pickup trucks. One of the reasons why those types of vehicles are more dangerous in an urban environment relates back to this concept of the peripheral view, because the driver is more elevated and farther away from the surface of the road. Again, that sense of speed diminishes a lot in larger vehicles because you are not as close to the sort of the building faces and the surface of the road that is moving relatively quickly relative to your body, and that means that we're more likely to speed. The other piece around speeding is the time that it takes to bring a vehicle to a stop when we eventually do notice that there is a danger that we need to stop for it. The faster we were going, the longer, based on the laws of physics, the longer it takes to bring that vehicle to a stop. And then coupled with that is the sort of the law of transfer of energy, that there's an exponential relationship between the speed at which two objects collide and the amount of damage that is caused to those objects. I'm sure there are many different sort of versions of this visual that you may have seen. This one is from the City of Toronto Complete Streets Guide that shows you that, if a driver hits a pedestrian at 50 kilometers per hour, there's an 85% likelihood that that person will not survive. And if you reduce that speed, but by just 10 kilometers per hour to 40 kilometers per hour, that likelihood improves significantly. And again, pointing at that exponential relationship there. So we know that a small reduction in speed makes a significant reduction in the probability of fatality or serious injury. And then the visual at the bottom This is the stats for Toronto, but it's not different for any other sort of North American jurisdiction. We know that majority of our fatalities and serious injuries are happening on our arterial roadways, even though they don't make up as many kilometers of a road network. And that's one because a lot of the volume is on those roads, but also because a lot of the speeding, higher speeds happen on those roads. Another compelling way of looking at it is again, this is City of Toronto numbers, but would be pretty similar for other jurisdictions. Looking at the total kilometers of road in each of our road classifications, local roads making up the majority of them. And interestingly, that's also where we hear a lot of the complaints from local residents and our elected officials when it comes to safety. But then when you look at where fatalities are happening, majority of them are happening on our arterial road network. Again, higher volumes, higher number of traffic lanes, and higher speeds. So the next several slides are where I'm going to jump into the many different programs and initiatives that we have, and where the information is available. I'm going to talk about the sort of measures of effectiveness of these that we have looked at. In 2019, we started looking at the network of our arterial roads where speed limits were more than 50 kilometers per hour and investigated whether there's any good reason why they should remain at higher than 50 kilometers per hour and reduce those. So that was about 250 kilometers of roadways that we investigated and reduced the speed limit of to 50 kilometers per hour. Similarly, in the following year, we looked at the collector's road network and where it made sense to reduce existing 50-kilometer per hour collector roads to 40 kilometers per hour. So we reduce about 60% of our roads of collector roads that way. So those together are about 500 kilometers of speed limit reductions that we did in the early days of our Vision Zero 2.0 program. Then a couple of years later, we used vehicle probe data from HERE Technologies that some people might be familiar with to look at if speed limit reductions alone have shown reductions in speeding. And we certainly saw some reductions there, some consistency. The nature of the data is in such way that we wouldn't be able to say, there was an X% reduction in speeding. But the reductions in the number of segments of road where we saw reductions were consistent. Moving on from our collector and arterial road network, we have now moved on to our local road network, where council unanimously approved the approach of reducing all local roads to 30 kilometers per hour. Again, knowing that relationship between speed and the likelihood of survival. So it's a program that we launched a couple of years ago, and it's a major endeavor in that we have thousands of kilometers of local roads in the city of Toronto. We are using a area-based approach in reducing those, similar to Ottawa or Mississauga that others may have seen, where we put these 30 kilometer per hour area begins and end signs at the beginning and end of sort of boundaries of a neighborhood. Back in 2015, the central part of Toronto saw all of the speeds on the local roads reduced to 30 kilometers per hour, and hospitals for sick kids at the time did a pretty rigorous study looking at the effect of that, and they found a 28% reduction in pedestrian motor vehicle collisions and a 67% reduction in serious injury and fatal collisions on those roadways compared to roadways that remained at 40 kilometers per hour elsewhere in the city. So we know that those reductions have made a difference. Just a quick visual showing those begin and end signs as you enter the local road network. I started with speed limit reductions, probably because you could argue they're the lowest hanging fruit, but we also know that they on their own won't get us to the speeds that we want to, simply reducing the speed limits. We know that ultimately designing self-enforcing roads that discourage speeding is the right approach. So one of the programs that we have in the city of Toronto is our traffic calming program, where we install speed humps, speed cushions, and speed bumps, which are limited to laneways only. And one thing that we did in 2023 is updated our traffic calming policy, knowing that we wanted to be able to expand the traffic calming toolkit at majority of the streets in our local road network. Now that council has, unanimously approved the idea of reducing all the local roads to 30 kilometers per hour, we know that these roads were not built for 30 kilometers per hour, and so we know that there's a big mismatch between how we want them to operate and how we built them several decades ago. So we know we need to do these interventions in the form of traffic calming. So the change that we made to the policy in 2023 really streamlined it, made it easier to meet the warrant, removed some of the barriers for communities that weren't as affluent and therefore not as organized in bringing their demands to their councillors and city officials, and sort of leveled the playing field. And so the graph you see in front of you shows the growth of the speed, the traffic calming program, with a big jump in 2025, and we are seeing forecasting into future years, we're seeing similar jumps. Very popular program and very much needed given the speed limits we're trying to achieve in the city. The other thing I'll point out is a new-ish tool that we added to the traffic calming program, which is speed cushions. We're always looking for tools to address speeding on higher order roads. Um, uh, and that's because a lot of times vertical deflection gets in the way of the types of use that you have for higher order roads, like emergency response and transit operations. We found after piloting speed cushions and running them with bus operations that they do serve both needs, and that buses are able to bypass them without being impacted. So the passenger vehicle is not the passenger experience is not impacted, but passenger vehicles still, at least one of their wheels will have to go over the hump, and they do have that traffic calming effect. So that's a relatively new tool that we have introduced that opens it up for a lot of our collector roadways with transit service on them. Another tool that we launched a few years ago is in-road flexible speed signs. Again, nothing too new. We've seen many other Canadian and North American jurisdictions launching these. To date, we have about 360 of these across the city, and every year we reach out to local councillors, tell them which area in their ward we have identified through a proactive method where we would like to target for speed reductions, and also give an opportunity for the councillors to identify locations where they want us to look at. I call this a 70-30 split. A lot of the programs that we are launching, we were trying to make sure that 70% of that capacity is reserved for data-driven location identification, where the data is telling us interventions are needed, but still reserving about 30% of the capacity for the community and counselors to bring their concerned locations of concern to us, and for us to look at whether an implementation makes sense. So when we piloted this a few years ago, we found an average reduction in travel speeds of about 10% after 6 months. It diminished a little bit after 18 months to around 6%, but it's still a significant enough reduction. The only other thing I'll say about this, because I know many other jurisdictions have looked at it as well, is whether they remain during the winter months. And based on the math that we did and the damage rate and the cost of removing and replacing them after winter, we have opted to keep them in place during the winter months. And we work with our snow colleagues to make sure they're damaged as little as possible. We have a mobile watch your speed program, which I'm sure many are familiar with. Digital display signs that picks up the speed of the vehicle that is approaching and flashes when that speed is over the speed limit. We launched it as a pilot several years ago, and we saw a 34% reduction in average speeds and 18% reduction in excessive speeding at those locations. So turned it into a full-time program where each ward of the city gets 7 of these signs that rotate to various locations based on the requests from the public, but also based on a data-driven approach where we identify speeding is more problematic and needs an intervention. This is a countermeasure that over time the effect of it diminishes, so the rotating nature makes sense um, to sort of renew its reduced speed reduction effect. In terms of the overall sort of modifying the geometry of the road and building self-enforcing road, I'm sure many are familiar with the City of Toronto lane width guidelines. We are in the midst of updating that right now for the first time since we launched it, and the update is very much aligned with what's in the lane width guidelines right now. Ultimately, narrowing the lanes to as wide as they need to be, but not wider, in order to make sure that we allocate the any excess capacity space on the road to other uh, modes and uses, whether it's greening, whether it's to add cycling infrastructure, whether it's increasing the width of the sidewalk, but as a result, also reducing the likelihood of vehicles speeding through those really wide lanes. So here's an example of Kipling Avenue that we did a few years ago. Um, so coupled with that, the ability to reallocate excess space on the road is the very many cycling infrastructure that we have added to city streets over the last several years. Here's an example of one on Bloor Street West, the Blue Street West Complete Street, where after the implementation we saw a 17% reduction in vehicle speeds in both directions. And it's both in terms of the added visual friction and sort of bringing in those walls next to the in the field of view of a driver that reminds them of how fast they might be traveling, but also just reallocating the excess roadway space to where it's most needed. There are also measures that we do at intersections that we may not often think about as speed mitigation strategies, because they're not mid-block and they're not trying to address those high speeds in between controls. Um, but they very much are still about addressing uh, speeding in this case, in the case of the left turn calming program, addressing speed of left turning vehicles. So again, a program that I'm sure is familiar to many, but it basically hardens the center line, encourages left turning vehicles to make their left at a slower speed and at a sharper angle that makes pedestrians more visible. And studies we've done with SEMA together with the University of Toronto has modeled the sort of the reduction in severe conflicts to where it looks like a 36% to 94% reduction in those modeled conflicts. So that's a program we have expanded. Every time we build a new traffic control signal where the opportunity is there, we add these left turn calming features. And in those instances, it looks more like the picture on the right, where that it's a permanent feature made out of concrete and asphalt. But we also sometimes use rubber humps when we want to put this intervention pretty quickly. Other measures at intersections are, as many are familiar, radius reductions that help reduce the speed of right turning vehicles. And similarly, in concept, is truck aprons, where we really still need to accommodate large trucks, but want to make sure passenger vehicles aren't speeding as they make their right turns. So that's the image on the right, and that's a program that we have expanded significantly. I think right now there is about 60 truck aprons in various stages of design or construction over the next few years in Toronto. Um, Raised crossings are another feature that the main purpose is to elevate the pedestrian, make them more visible, but they also have a speed management effect in that the vertical deflection certainly slows down the speed of any vehicle that's going through the intersection or making a turn onto that leg. So I wanted to make sure I highlight that. And similarly, curb extensions again have the same effect. Um, and then lastly, a sort of a countermeasure we are looking at down the line, we're looking to pilot is using zigzag pavement markings that I'm sure many have seen elsewhere in the world, in the UK and Australia, as a way of improving yield behavior at crossings. But the mechanism through which they do that is also through managing speed and sort of increasing awareness for drivers as they're approaching a point of potential conflict. So that's something we're looking to explore. If anyone's if this has piqued anyone's interest, or if you're thinking about it, or if you've done it already, I would love to chat with you further. Um, I also wanted to share this slide because, as mentioned, so much of these speed management strategies, that none of them are new, but so much of this is about how are we rolling them out? How are we selecting locations? How are we making sure we get the biggest bang for the buck? And so, a model that our data and analytics unit developed a few years ago, and they are sort of revamping it now with improvements. It looks at it's a predictive model that looks at high risk mid block crossings. So it tries to not only look at historical collisions within each mid block segment, but use those collisions to develop a predictive model that tells you relative to other segments of the road what is the relative likelihood, relative risk of a road segment for this type of collision, mid block collision, which then helps us significantly with deciding where to roll out the many different countermeasures that I went through already. And then I think the last sort of grouping of countermeasures is speed enforcement, whether in the form of officer-led enforcement or automated enforcement. With Bill 65 a few years ago in Ontario, we now have automated enforcement. We have 75 cameras right now and another 75 being launched in the first sort of half or quarter of this year. So we're going to end up with 150 cameras that are a mix of rotating cameras and permanent installations. And we did a study with Toronto Metropolitan University and Sick Kids when the program initially launched, and that found a 45% reduction in proportion of drivers speeding. So we know that it's a pretty effective program. So again, it's about where do we roll this program out to get the biggest amount of improvement. And then coupled with that is we started again in 2019 transferring about $3 million of funding each year to Toronto Police for a dedicated Vision Zero enforcement team of officers, about 20 officers that are deployed to different areas of the city every 2 weeks based on historical collisions and where they understand sort of problematic behavior to be. And then lastly, something that's very hard to measure, of course, but it is our education and outreach programs. We couple these with our other programs. So the image that you see on the far right is coupled with the rollout of our local road speed limit reductions. So every time a new ward is being targeted, we make sure that those postal codes start seeing these campaigns through their social media channels, in addition to a citywide campaign like the one you see on the left. But generally, trying to raise awareness about the dangers of speeding and what is at stake when drivers do speed. This is my last slide. We launched a Safe Speeds toolkit a few years ago. I think borrowing, if I remember correctly, City of Edmonton had something similar that we really liked and launched it, sort of taking from that idea. Again, sharing, sort of raising awareness about the effect of speed, but also You can't see all the drop down menu at the bottom of the web page, but if you go, if you Google City of Toronto Safe Spill Toolkit, it provides all the different tools to the residents that they have available to them when they are concerned about speeding, and how to navigate them, and how to reach out to city staff, and how to put requests through. I think that is my last slide. Yes, so I'm going to stop sharing screen and open it up to questions.
Great, thanks, Jada. That was a great presentation. Thanks for sharing all that information. Great to hear about everything that's happening there in Toronto. And thankfully, we do have some questions. So, like hot topic, obviously. Some of the first ones, some of the ones that I'll start with, and there's a few that are kind of related. But about got a couple questions about the in-street speed limit signs. So one question was, do you have any more information about keeping them through the winter? Some people expressed some challenges or perceived concerns about even trying that out. So how has it gone? You mentioned you had looked at like cost benefit and like looking at damage that did occur. And
Yeah,
any more information about that would be great.
we found about 15 or 20% of them got knocked down in that first winter after the pilot. And that number has reduced now that there's so many more of them across the network. And not all of them are getting knocked down and getting pulled out from the base. Sometimes it was as simple as replacing the sign. And yeah, ultimately, when we looked at the costs associated with um, replacing removing all of them at the beginning of the winter season and putting them back out. Uh, in addition to the safety benefits that they continue to bring during those 6 or so months of winter, it was a no-brainer to keep them in and incur the cost of replacement where they do get knocked down. And as I mentioned, we work closely with our snow clearing colleagues to give them these specific locations every year as the new ones get added in, and they add it to the beat maps of the snow crews and sort of flag it for them so they avoid it. One of the other things I'll mention is we don't put them close to intersections or close to crosswalks, because I know some other jurisdictions, the snow challenge wasn't just about damage to them, but about the snow drift as a result of the physical presence of these inroad signs. Going into the crosswalk space and blocking the space for pedestrians. The way we apply them in Toronto then is they're where I forget the distance, at least 30 meters, if not more, away from crossings.
Okay.
But we are looking at another application for them in close to pedestrian crossovers to improve yield compliance, and certainly the snow drift issue is top of mind in those instances.
Okay, that's great. And did you try different products, or how has the product been working? Any comments on that, or did you try any other ones?
If what I recall is no, that we tried the one product that is sort of most commonly used in North America, and it seems to be working. So we haven't been exploring other options yet.
Okay, good. Um, uh, so yeah, thanks. That covers off a couple questions. So that's really good. Um, One other question we had was about just about the nature of requests or concerns that municipalities get, and that they're quite often on local roads. Even though when we look at a lot of the collision data, the severe and fatal collisions are generally happening on higher speed roadways. And so the question was, have you broken down your injury or fatality rates by different age groups, for example, kids and elderly? And have you also looked at where those collisions are occurring on the network?
Yeah, I remember several years ago when we first launched the Vision Zero Road Safety Plan, we launched the school safety zone program. And at the time we were doing 20 school zones each year. And the school zone program is very popular. And so immediately there were asks from council to accelerate that program. So we accelerated to 40 a year. And then there was another ask the next year to accelerate, and we accelerated it to 80 a year. And then the next time there was a question for that, we really went back and dug into the data and presented that to elected officials that we hear you that safety of children is a priority for all of us. But when you look at where collisions involving children are happening, majority of them are not in school zones, because school zones, for good reason, are within the boundaries of the local roads, because most schools open their main entrances on local roads. So we try to show that, for us to be effective at going after injuries and fatalities involving that particular age group, it still makes sense to focus on the higher order roads and the countermeasures that are there, as opposed to accelerating the school safety zone program further. It's a program that continues to be popular, and it does help sort of elevate the attention of drivers when they are going through the school. But we want to make sure we don't put all of our eggs in one basket and take away focus from the higher order roads. So I would say, like, the early slides that I gave in this webinar are ones that I often make sure I use in communications with counselors and their staff every time I do a Vision Zero primer or briefing, in order to help them understand why we focus on what we focus on, and why it needs to be a data-driven program, and why, while we reserve a certain amount of capacity for requests, the requests are not necessarily representative of where fatalities and serious injuries are happening.
Yeah, great. Okay. This next question is an interesting one. It's kind of a perennial question when it comes to traffic calming, but this is a little bit more on the technology side. So the question starts with a statement and then moves into questions, which is, Waze and other navigation tools appear to direct traffic off of arterials where traffic has been slowed onto collectors through neighborhoods, depending on traffic. So I guess as you slow the traffic on those higher class roadways, there's potential to divert traffic onto lower class roadways. And so the question was, can speed limits be reduced to 20 kilometers an hour on the lower class roadways to discourage that shortcutting through local roads? Any thoughts on
Um, I mean, we want to reduce speed limits to what is practically achievable with the engineering and geometric measures that we have available to us, and our traffic calming program and speed humps uh, achieve that 30 kilometers per hour. So we're trying to be realistic with what we put in. I'll say, with the popularity of the traffic calming program and our ability to expand on that program quite rapidly, we're going to see more and more of the local road network having speed humps and really making it harder to go at anywhere more than 30 kilometers per hour. So while drivers might get diverted because they want to avoid the arterial, they still, like, volumes might go up, but speeding would be pretty hard to do. And whether that in the long run has a rediversion back to the arterial road network or not, the effect of it will be reduced speeds on the local road network.
Yeah. Okay, great. I think this will be a quick one. You mentioned that there's a 10% speed drop for the in-road speed limit signs, and then after 6 months, it had kind of gone stabilized at 6%.
After
Did you
18 months, yeah.
yeah. So did you actually look at the effect on the higher speed? Like, did you look by categories, and did it have a stronger effect on the outliers at the high end?
It does. Yeah, I didn't sort of put it in that one summary sentence, but yes, at the locations with excessive speeding, there's a larger reduction in those instances.
Okay, great. There's a quick question that I'll just say the presentation is being recorded and will be available after. There will be more information coming about that with the survey that goes out after this presentation. So that should be there. There's also a specific question about the outcome from the prediction model on slide 23. I can't remember what prediction model that was, but
Yeah.
it's collisions only, or are conflicts and near misses included?
Collisions only, all injury types, as the sort of the data that was fed into the model. in addition to a lot of the built environment characteristics, like number of travel lanes, the volume of vehicles, presence of transit stops, sort of the legs of the intersection. So lots of different built environment factors where together with the collision history helped uh, predict the relative risk of a particular road segment compared to another one. Um, there will be a presentation on that model at the Ontario Road Safety Forum for anyone here who happens to be going to that, and further information about the model that will be shared as publications.
Okay, that's great. We got a question that I know is from one of my just recently former colleagues at the City of Calgary. Thanks for the great presentation. For speed humps, cushions, and bumps, as well as the in-street signs, was there any pushback from transit, emergency, or winter maintenance services prior to the installation? And have they provided feedback post-installation? And any methods to evaluate the effects of these measures?
For speed cushions, I'll say that knowing potential pushback, we reached out to fire services, emergency crews, and the TTC, the public transit agency in Toronto, and worked with them on identifying a pilot location, bringing in their vehicles during the pilot phase, and riding with them and understanding the impact on them. So it very much was a collaborative process. Generally speaking, fire services have a sort of a default statement every time the city proposes speed humps anywhere on the local road network, in that it does sort of increase the response time on that particular roadway. That said, we know that uh, majority of the time that a emergency vehicle spends on the road network is not on the local road network. It's on the arterial and collector system, and they ultimately agree that it helps reduce the instances where they need to respond to injuries in the first place. In terms of snow, yes. Again, anything in the road that gets in the way of plows, sort of operating more freely, is a concern. Again, we worked closely with our snow colleagues during the pilot phase to understand the impact to them and how we could communicate the locations and how we could set up our guidelines so that beyond a minimum width the in-road flex signs aren't placed and we're not sort of impeding the operation of snow removal.
Okay, great. We've got a couple here that are kind of like a crossover between traffic safety and accessibility. One was about the truck aprons, which I noticed had the TWSIs, the tactile warning surface indicators, on the sidewalk and not going across the apron. But the question was, is there a concern that that crosswalk may be perceived as a safe spot to stop? And then the other question is about roundabouts being a traffic calming solution related to speed. And if
Right.
you have any information about pedestrian safety and roundabouts, um, uh, and specifically for people with vision loss. So again, kind of accessibility related.
Okay, I'll talk about the truck aprons. One of the ways in which we have tried to make sure that that truck apron space isn't misunderstood by pedestrians as a place to stop is to make sure that one, the Twizzys are set back behind the back line, and also that the truck apron itself is made of asphalt and zebra markings are painted within that additional space to make it really clear that this is part of the crosswalk and not part of where you wait. We're also launching a campaign, a citywide campaign that communicates, because there is still a relatively new tool, communicates what they are, how they work, and where pedestrians are expected to wait. We're coupling that with physical signs that we're putting out at locations where we're introducing truck aprons for a temporary sort of a few months, where the sign physically shows where pedestrians should and shouldn't wait, to try and minimize those instances, again, in the early days of the program where people may not know where they're supposed to stop. Um, On the roundabout solution, I mean, we certainly know the science is out there around the improvements that roundabout make on higher speed type collisions. Toronto has dealt very little with roundabouts because they typically require more space than we have available in our built environment within our sort of already existing road network. So we don't have a lot of experience with roundabouts. What I will say is the challenge with accessibility for pedestrians with vision impairment is certainly a known one at roundabouts, given that there is a sort of a yield behavior expected. And it is not that dissimilar to right turn channels that we have in Toronto, and we are removing them whenever we get the opportunity because of that accessibility challenge.
Great. Okay, the next question that was asked was about the senior safety zones. So if those are still continuing, and if there are any specific speed management strategies specifically for those senior zones as opposed to other areas.
Senior Safety Zones is a program we launched in the early days of our Vision Zero road safety plan in 2016, in a way as a low-hanging fruit. But since then, we've acknowledged that seniors live in many places in the city of Toronto, and the types of countermeasures that we have, like many that I went through today, shouldn't be limited to a particular zone in the city, but wherever there is a problem identified or where we want to make that targeted improvement. So we haven't been expanding. We have about 62 or so senior safety zone. We haven't been expanding the number of senior safety zones. But one thing we did, for example, late last year, is we introduced an additional about 20 community safety zones, which is what enables the implementation of automated speed enforcement in Ontario, with a particular lens to senior collisions and concentration of senior populations, whether it's sort of residents aging in place or senior homes. So we sort of use the data-driven approach, again, using that model that I had showed to identify these 20 new locations for automated speed enforcement. And then that's an example of ways of which we are trying to prioritize safety of seniors instead of just sort of designating new senior safety zones.
Yeah, okay, great. We've got a couple questions kind of related to lane reduction or right sizing roadways. So I guess what are some of the criteria followed to apply that in terms of the original road speed, traffic volumes, number percentage trucks, those types of things? And then do you have any recommendations for navigating pushback when you are right sizing roadways? Like if you look at those other criteria, whatever they are, but you're still getting pushback from the community with the perception that they're losing a lane of traffic. Any comments on that?
I say, I mean, we have the benefit that our lane width guidelines have been in effect since 2016. So we have a lot of existing roads now to point to show where lane widths have been reduced and the benefits that they have brought and the concerns that the community might have haven't materialized. So that's one of the ways in which we deal with the pushback. And in terms of the parameters, yeah, I mean, the lane width guidelines are pretty detailed, and the updates to it is even adds even more sort of context specific guidance as to how to make these decisions around how narrow to go and depending on, as you said, volume of trucks, volume of other traffic. So I won't get into the detail, but I'll say that when the revised lane width guidelines are out there, it will be made available on the City of Toronto website, and I would encourage folks to take a look. There's a pretty detailed sort of process flow diagram that helps with that decision-making process.
Great, excellent. Okay, the next one's curious about the asphalt truck aprons again, and I think I would kind of express the same question about the, and I think it's kind of related to the left turn traffic calming. Where you said that you had done some analysis about conflicts, but have you found that that the asphalt truck aprons are achieving the intended outcome in terms of keeping general traffic following that curb line that's out in the roadway as opposed to traveling over the apron? And is that impacting turning speed and conflicts?
We have found that generally passenger vehicles are following it. In the early days of the program, um, the devil's always in the detail with these sort of new designs. So what happened in the early days of the program, there were a few instances where the truck apron wasn't built properly and and it was flush with the surface, so it was easy for a passenger vehicle to mount it because there wasn't much of a mounting going on. And at those
Mhm.
instances, we have seen that compliance is very low. But more recently, with the more, I wish I could show a video of where one of my staff showed one at Steels and Brimley that we just installed earlier this year, where compliance is 100%. And I wouldn't even call it compliance because we're not trying to encourage anybody to follow certain rules of the road. It's about, again, talking about self-enforcing road. It is built in such a way that a driver of a passenger vehicle wouldn't feel comfortable doing anything else but to go around the tighter radius. So when built right, and over the years working with our engineering construction services colleagues, we are finally getting it right. The inspectors are finally understanding what it is that they are to look for when the contractor is setting up their formwork and pouring it. It shows quite promising results.
Okay. And as a engineer geeking out, any idea what type of a curb height you use that it kind of achieves that? Like,
I
is
think
it a 75 or 100? No.
75 millimeter is what we're,
Okay.
yeah. But we
Okay.
recently put out detailed standards to again make sure there's no misunderstanding between the contractor and the inspector, so that those are available on our website too. I'm happy to share it to another
Okay.
engineer geek.
That's great. This is an interesting question that I'm sure a lot of municipalities are interested in. Where does the funding come from to get Vision Zero initiatives implemented?
So in Toronto, I would say unlike some other jurisdictions like Ottawa, because I get this question often, automated enforcement doesn't pay for our road safety program. So the road safety program is a mix of capital and operating budget that with the launch of the Vision Zero Road Safety Plan in 2016, as I mentioned, it started with 20 million, and every year, as a part of our budget submission, we make the case for why we need additional funding. And council, being very much aware of the priority that is road safety in Toronto, has always sort of approved our requested budget for the road safety program. As is probably the case in many jurisdictions, capital funding is often harder, easier to identify than operating. But again, but so the automated speed enforcement program and the red light camera program, which are quite costly from an operating budget perspective, uh, also bring revenues to the city. Those revenues go into the general City of Toronto bucket, so they're not directly reflected in our road safety budget, but they certainly are understood to be programs that are that make up for themselves and more. So in that sense, there's a lot of support for them as
Okay. Got a question here about uh, are there any plans to monitor the impacts of potential bike path removals on collisions and injuries? So I haven't been paying too close of attention, but is that actually happening? Are you removing bike paths? And if so, what are you doing for evaluation?
The city of Toronto is not initiating any bike paths removal, but the province of Ontario has initiated a process. It remains to be seen when and if what form that takes. But certainly, one of the concerns we have raised over the course of the last several months, where this idea has floated, is safety concerns with injuries and fatalities, and that is something we are going to closely monitor.
Okay. One last question, I think. Um, sorry, the questions keep bouncing around here. With the dedicated Vision Zero enforcement team, are you seeing sustained behavioral changes at deployment locations? And I guess that kind of goes in with all of the other measures there, but how's that going, and any evaluation results you could share with us?
That's a good question and not one that I have a great answer to, but we have been reaching out to our Toronto police colleagues with that same question and trying to come up with a way of measuring the effectiveness of the approach and whether it needs to be tweaked. There's certainly close to like 50,000 tickets issued against the top four types of infractions that most contribute to fatalities and serious injuries, but we would like to know how much that is resulting in sort of, as you said, sustained reductions. I don't know the answer to that question, admittedly.
Okay. I guess we'll leave that for another one. Thank you so much, Shada. That was a really fun presentation. Lots of great questions, obviously super engaged audience. So thank you so much for your time. Thanks everybody for joining. And I'll just remind everybody that when you leave, you should be getting a request to provide a survey. If you can fill that out, you'll be entered for a Tim Hortons gift card. And great for us so we can continue to improve these webinars. And yeah, thanks so much for joining, and thanks again, Shada.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay, take care. Safe travels. Bye.
Bye.